Well, a very busy day here in the Westminster Village. It all kicked off with Steve Baker, yes, the Northern Ireland minister, issuing the most bizarre statement demanding that Boris Johnson back the Windsor framework, else he might be thought to become a Nigel Farage. We'll talk a bit more about that later on. The vote happened in Parliament and the government won with an absolutely massive majority. There were 23 Conservative members of Parliament that rebelled. And I'll talk a bit more over the course of the next hour about the Windsor framework and why I think it is far, far away from the spin that Rishi Sunak put on it. I have to say, I feel that Euroscepticism in the Conservative Party has gone back to where it was at the time of Maastricht, 30 years ago, when 26 Tory MPs voted against third reading. That worries me. I'll tell you more about that. But then it was Boris Johnson up before the committee this afternoon, about 3 hours of interrogation and grilling. Well, people will have to make their own minds up, including the committee, and the committee have to report over the course of the next 3 weeks. Did Johnson willfully, deliberately mislead Parliament? But more importantly, they were also looking for, was Johnson reckless in what he said to Parliament? Now, that's a much lower bar than you'd ever get in a criminal court. If it turned out that Johnson was suspended for 10 days or more from the House of Commons, then that would trigger a process that would inevitably lead to a by-election in Uxbridge, his constituency, which I've no doubt he would lose. It would effectively, I think, be the end of his political career. What did I think of the testimony that he gave? Well, when he said that the leaving parties were essential, I was reminded that at that time we were told to stay in our houses, to only leave for an hour every day, not to go and meet our elderly or dying relatives, not to socialise in any way at all. And the head of state, I suppose, the Queen, set the most extraordinary example, because there she was, in the chapel, in Windsor, at the funeral of her husband, sitting there on her own. And while she was doing that, the people that were making the rules that we were supposed to abide by, well, the Prime Minister says he didn't really understand the rules, so he had to get counsel, and he was given guidance. He told the House of Commons again and again, I was told, no rules have been broken. Today it turned out that the people he got the rules from weren't people like Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary. No, there were people like Jack Doyle, press officers, junior press officers, young people who he himself had appointed. I have to say, I found his response at times slightly rambling, repetitive, angry, irritable. But the big question is, can he survive this? I think he probably will. Give me your thoughts, Farage at GBNews.uk. And I think he'll survive it because they will not, it seems to me, absolutely be able to prove that he lied to Parliament. That's my guess. To get a more dispassionate view, I'm joined by GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, what's the talk over the road post this grilling, I guess is all we can call it?
Well, yes, there's no feeling that Boris Johnson sort of covered himself in glory, but nor is there a feeling that it was an absolute fiasco for him. On a number of issues, it felt like Boris actually had the upper ground. The committee were trying to build a case that it was obvious to Boris Johnson that he broke the rules. And he made the argument, and he made it quite well, that if it was so obvious, why would, for example, there be a number 10 official photographer there? Why, when it was reported in the Times, did no one really raise an eyebrow? He also did quite a good job of sort of lumping himself in with the civil servants who were at these gatherings as well. And essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but saying, well, if I broke the rules, didn't they too? On the other hand, there were a few areas.
I have to say, I didn't find that very charming at all. At school, you just said that he was dobbing them in it.
Well, yes, he then sort of turned it on his head and said, it wouldn't be fair to accuse them of lying, so it isn't fair to accuse me of lying either. But yeah, a bit of a toady move there. But then there are a couple of areas where it did feel as though he was losing ground a bit. As you say, this question of whether he recklessly misled Parliament. So there was no sort of evidence that he was, no smoking gun evidence, as it were, that he was lying. But the committee zoned in on this issue that he didn't set the record straight. He stood up and told Parliament what it turned out was a mistruth. And then he had a long time And what did he do to establish whether or not he'd told the truth? Did he go to lawyers? Did he copper plate that evidence that he gave to the Commons?
And that's where the word reckless would come in.
And that's where the word recklessly comes in.
Yeah.
So, yes, they were prepared to believe that he accidentally stood up and told the Commons a lie because that's what his advisers had told him. But then wasn't he duty-bound, the committee argued, to go and check that evidence and to make sure that it was correct? And he didn't do that. So it does seem quite likely that he recklessly misled Parliament. So they might come down on that. I mean, zoning out of the whole thing a little bit, what Boris Johnson presumably wants to achieve from this is a route back into politics, a route back into frontline politics. And it could be that even if he survives this committee hearing, as you suggest, his political nous will be gone, his reputation will be ruined. Because, yes, he could get out of it on technicalities. It could be that he didn't quite understand the guidance. But everyone sitting at home did understand the guidance. And will that have been an edifying spectacle to them to see Boris Johnson sort of trying to wriggle his way out of this?
I mean, whatever happens, it does not increase his standing with the Great British Parliament.
No, if it's a victory, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah. Another thought. I woke up this morning and I could see that we were going to have two former Prime Ministers, Johnson and Truss, former Conservative leader, Duncan Smith, voting against the Windsor Framework. I mean, some really quite big names and former cabinet ministers too. And I thought to myself at 7 o'clock this morning, well, of course, Keir Starmer, this clever lawyer, he's clearly going to get the Labour Party now to vote against or to abstain, to embarrass the government, yet he didn't do it, and it passed with a massive majority. Why on earth didn't Starmer have a go?
Well, no, it's very interesting that because, yes, as you say in your opening remarks there were only 20 or so MPs who voted against the government, but there were quite a lot of abstentions. It seems as though there were plenty of Conservative MPs on the backbenches who didn't like the Windsor Framework, but Rishi Sunak handled them carefully. He's a competent, slick politician, and he knew how to handle them, so he managed to get them not to actually vote against the government. But, as you say, if Labour had chosen to withhold their support, then it actually would have been pretty damaging for the government. But that's not Mr Starmer's style. Sir Keir Starmer's style, I should say.
There we are. Olivia Rutley, thank you very much indeed.